The night everything broke. If you're brave enough to hear what they tried to bury, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and don't look away, because this story doesn't just haunt the inmates, it haunts the guards who survived it. The alarm started at 2:17 a.m. Not the routine buzz of a door left open or a minor disturbance. This was different.
Loud.
Relentless. The kind that sent every officer on high alert within seconds. Inside Block D, death row, the lights snapped on one by one, flooding the narrow corridor with a harsh, sterile glow. Steel doors lined both sides, each one holding a man waiting to die. But tonight, something had gone very wrong. Officer Daniel Hayes was the first to reach cell 14. He froze. The door was still locked. But inside, the inmate wasn't where he was supposed to be. Marcus Vance, convicted of a brutal double homicide and less than 3 weeks away from execution, was lying motionless on the floor. His body twisted at an unnatural angle, one hand stretched toward the bars like he had tried to crawl out. Hayes swallowed hard and called it in. Medical emergency. Block D, cell 14. Unresponsive inmate. Within minutes, the corridor filled with officers, medical staff, and supervisors. The cell was opened. Vance was checked. No pulse. No movement. No visible struggle. It didn't make sense. Death row inmates didn't just die. Not like this. Not without warning, not without witnesses, not inside a locked cell under constant surveillance. Warden Elise Carter arrived shortly after, her expression sharp, controlled, but her eyes scanning everything with quiet urgency. "What happened?" she asked. No one had an answer. The cameras had been active. The guards had done their rounds. Nothing unusual had been reported, until the footage was reviewed. At 1:52 a.m., Marcus Vance was alive, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. At 2:03 a.m., the camera glitched. Just for a few seconds. A flicker. A distortion. Then it returned. And Marcus Vance was on the floor. Warden Carter watched the clip twice. Then a third time.
"Zoom in," she said.
The technician hesitated, but followed the order. The grainy footage sharpened slightly. That's when they saw it. Right before the camera glitched, Marcus Vance turned his head. Not toward the door. Not toward the camera. But toward the back wall of his cell. As if someone or something was there. A silence fell over the control room. "There's no access point there," one officer muttered. "It's solid concrete." Warden Carter didn't respond, because she already knew something the others didn't. Cell 14 had been sealed off years ago, not because of a maintenance issue, but because of what happened to the last inmate who stayed there. She turned away from the screen. "Lock the block down," she ordered. "No one in, no one out. I want every officer accounted for, every log reviewed, and every inch of that cell searched." The investigation began immediately. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it became. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of tampering, no fingerprints besides the guards and the inmate himself. And yet, something was off. Then came the report from one of the newer officers. He had been doing rounds near the end of the corridor when he heard something. A voice.
Low. Calm.
Whispering from inside cell 14. At first, he thought it was Vance talking to himself. But when he passed the cell, he realized something that made his blood run cold. There were two distinct voices. One of them wasn't Marcus Vance. And when investigators went back to check the audio logs from the corridor microphones, they found something buried beneath the static. A faint recording. Distorted, but clear enough to understand a single sentence. "Tell them the truth before it's too late." The voice didn't match Marcus Vance. It didn't match any guard on duty. And, according to the prison records, it didn't belong to anyone who was supposed to be alive. Warden Carter stood in the empty corridor later that morning, staring at the sealed back wall of cell 14. Because behind that wall, there wasn't supposed to be anything. But as the maintenance team prepared to break it open, one question hung in the air, heavier than the silence itself. What were they about to uncover? And why had it been hidden for so long? The wall that shouldn't exist. The first strike of the hammer echoed through Block D, like a gunshot. Every officer standing in the corridor flinched. Concrete dust spilled into the air as the maintenance team chipped away at the back wall of cell 14. The sound was deafening in the narrow hallway, bouncing off steel and stone, vibrating through the bones of everyone watching. Warden Elise Carter stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But her eyes never left the wall.
Keep going, she said.
Piece by piece, the truth began to surface. The concrete was thinner than expected, not structural. Added later. That alone was enough to raise alarms. Warden, one of the workers muttered, stepping back. There's a gap behind this. The tool stopped. Silence rushed in. Carter stepped forward. Open it. With one final blow, the remaining slab cracked and fell inward. And suddenly, the wall wasn't a wall anymore. It was a cover. Behind it was a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Dark, suffocating, stretching into a space no one on record had ever acknowledged. A hidden corridor. Inside a maximum security death row block. That's not possible, one officer whispered. But it was. Flashlights cut through the darkness as Carter and two officers stepped inside. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of damp concrete, and something older, something forgotten. The passage ran behind multiple cells. Cell 14 wasn't the only one connected to it, which meant one thing. Someone could have moved between cells without ever being seen. Carter's jaw tightened. Who built this? She demanded. No one answered. Because no one knew. At the end of the narrow corridor, the passage opened into a small chamber. And what they found inside made everything worse.
A chair. Old.
Rusted. Bolted to the floor. And beside it, chains. Not modern restraints. These were older.
Crude.
Worn from repeated use. This place hadn't just existed. It had been used. A lot. One of the officers stepped closer, shining his flashlight across the wall. There were markings carved into the concrete.
Dozens of them. Lines.
Symbols. Scratches. And then names. Some faint. Some deep and deliberate. All of them belonging to former inmates. Men who had passed through death row over the years. Men who were executed. Or so the records claimed. Carter felt a chill crawl up her spine. Check the logs, she said quietly. Every inmate who was ever assigned to cell 14. I want their full records. Back in the control room, the files were pulled, one by one, and a disturbing pattern began to form. Several inmates who had been housed in cell 14 had unusual reports attached to their cases. Complaints of hearing voices, claims of being watched, allegations that someone was entering their cells at night. All dismissed, all labeled as psychological deterioration. Until now. Then came the name that changed everything. Elliot Grayson, an inmate executed 12 years earlier. Official cause, lethal injection.
Case closed.
But as Carter flipped through the archive documents, something didn't sit right. The execution report was incomplete. Missing signatures. Missing verification. And the time of death didn't match the official schedule. Pull the footage from that date, Carter ordered. The technician hesitated. Warden, that's over a decade old. Most of it's been wiped. Then find what's left. Minutes later, a fragment of recovered footage flickered onto the screen. It showed the execution chamber hallway. Guards moving. Routine procedures. But then, at exactly 1:13 a.m., 2 hours after Elliot Grayson was officially declared dead, a figure appeared on camera. Walking. Unsteady. Escorted by 2 officers. Not toward the medical wing, but toward Block D, towards cell 14. The room went silent. That's not possible, someone said under their breath. But Carter knew better, because the man in the footage was Elliot Grayson.
Alive.
And being taken back to a cell he was never supposed to leave. She turned slowly, her mind racing. If Grayson had been alive after his execution, then what exactly had been happening inside that hidden corridor? And more importantly, was Marcus Vance really the first inmate to die in that cell? Or just the first one whose death couldn't be hidden? The truth buried in death row. The room felt colder after the footage ended. No one spoke. No one moved. Warden Elise Carter stood still, her eyes locked on the frozen frame of Elliot Grayson, declared dead, yet walking. That single image shattered everything the prison claimed to be. "Seal Block D," Carter said quietly. "No one leaves. No one talks." But deep down, she already knew. This wasn't just a prison problem. This was something much bigger. Within hours, an internal investigation team arrived. Records were pulled, retired staff were contacted, and every inch of the hidden corridor was documented. And then the truth began to surface. It started with a name buried deep in old personnel files. Dr. Leonard Kessler, former prison medical director, retired 10 years ago, officially praised for his innovative behavioral studies on high-risk inmates, unofficially almost erased from the system. Carter sat across from him in a quiet interview room later that night. Kessler looked older than his records suggested. Tired, nervous, like a man who had spent years waiting for this exact moment. "You found it, didn't you?" he said before she even asked a question. Carter didn't blink. "Start talking." Kessler exhaled slowly, his hands trembling. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he began. "It started as research. Psychological endurance. The human mind under extreme conditions. Using death row inmates." Carter asked coldly. "They were already condemned," Kessler replied. No one questioned it. The hidden corridor. The chamber.
The chains.
It wasn't random. It was a controlled environment. Inmates from Cell 14 were taken through that passage, subjected to unauthorized experiments, sleep deprivation, isolation, psychological manipulation. All off the record. All hidden from the system. And Elliot Grayson? Carter pressed. Kessler looked down. He didn't die during execution, he admitted. The dosage was altered. Enough to make it appear complete, but not enough to kill him immediately. Carter felt her stomach tighten. "You faked his death." Kessler nodded slowly. He was valuable. His mental resilience was unlike anything we'd seen. "We wanted to study it further." "So you brought him back," Carter said, her voice barely controlled. "Yes." "And the others?" Kessler hesitated. "Some didn't survive the process," he whispered. "Others broke." The room fell silent. All those names carved into the wall. They weren't just inmates. They were victims. "And Marcus Vance?" Carter asked. "What happened to him?" Kessler's expression changed.
Fear.
"He wasn't part of the program," he said. "At least not officially." Carter leaned forward. "Explain." Kessler swallowed hard. "Someone restarted it." The words hit like a shockwave. "After I left, I assumed everything had been shut down," he continued. "But if Vance died in that cell, then someone else knew about the corridor. Someone with access. Someone inside." Carter's mind immediately went to the only person who could authorize that level of control. But before she could speak, an alarm blared. Not from Block D. From the main security system. "Warden," a voice shouted from outside. "You need to see this." Carter rushed back to the control room. The screen showed live footage from the hidden corridor. Empty. At first. Then, movement. A figure stepped into view from the darkness. Wearing a guard's uniform. Face partially hidden, but clear enough to recognize. Deputy Warden Samuel Briggs. The second highest authority in the prison. And he wasn't alone. Behind him, another man stepped forward.
Weak.
Unsteady. Eyes hollow, but alive. The room froze as the camera zoomed in. Carter's breath caught in her throat, because the man standing beside Briggs was Elliot Grayson, 12 years after his execution. Still alive. Still inside the prison. The truth wasn't buried. It was still happening.
Right now.
And as the screen flickered, Briggs looked directly into the camera, almost as if he knew they were watching. Then he reached forward and cut the feed. The room plunged into silence. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far worse. And somewhere inside that prison, men who were supposed to be dead were still waiting to be found. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for what comes next.